Now, at this time, I'm going to call the one missionary family that I did mention, Luke and Becca Perkins and all their children that are up front here. And are you Alan? Yeah, okay. I'm friends with you on Facebook. Nice to meet you in person. Because we were going on a trip to Haiti one time, and that's how we got there. Anyway, it's good to have Luke here. Luke is a great man of God. I consider him to be a friend. And we've been so excited to partner with them in their ministry in Haiti. And now, soon, they're in transition and being ready to become the president of Cross World Ministries. And so we're excited to have him share this pulpit. So we invite him up here. God bless you, brother.
Thank you. Well, I saw Pastor John this morning, and I've been around condolences this morning. I'm sure the next game will go better because we all know what is the best team? Alabama, right? It is great to be with you this morning. I want to start by just thanking you for your support of us in these years in Haiti and for your prayers for us as we've been serving there. Some of you know the past several years in Haiti have been very, very difficult, and right now things are especially difficult there. We thank you for praying for us through all of that as we lost our campus to armed gangs. I talked a little bit about that Friday night. That campus remains in their hands, by the way, still today. So thank you for continuing to pray for that. Thank you especially, too, for praying for my family this summer as my wife underwent some surgery. We praise God that has gone really well, and she's doing great. She's here today, looking hot as ever. Can I say that? I don't know if I can say that. Yeah, So we praise God for what he's doing, and we're grateful to be able to partner with you, especially now as we shift and as our ministry focus shifts and really expands. And in a sense, your ministry focus and your ministry impact expands as this spring we'll be transitioning back to the United States and taking on leadership of Crossworld. If you've never heard of Crossworld before, Crossworld is a mission that used to be called UFM, Unevangelized Fields Mission. Some of you may know it by that name. It's been around for a long time, I think like 90 years or something. I should probably figure out how old it is since I'm about to be the president. But Crossworld is a mission where what we're trying to do is we're trying to help ordinary people become effective cross-cultural disciple makers. And so at Crossworld, we have a dream that we want to see disciple makers from all professions, engineers, doctors, entrepreneurs, all professions, bringing God's love to life in the world's least reached marketplaces. And so I'm excited about Crossworld and what it's doing right now across the world. If you have any questions or you're interested at all in thinking about what it looks like to maybe take your profession or your skills or whatever and use that as a way to make an impact in the least reached, love to talk with you after. We've got some literature set up at our table in the hallway and would love to discuss that with you. I was fooling around on my phone yesterday, swiping through like you do, and I came across a video yesterday of this musician. Now, I don't know about you, but I love when I get to see somebody in their element, doing the thing that they are really good at. You know what I mean by that? And I came across this musician, and he was playing classical guitar, and he was playing flamenco music. How many of you ever, any classical guitar fans here? Anybody, you know? He was playing flamenco music, and if you've ever heard this music, it's beautiful. And I'm watching him on the video, and his fingers are just flying over the fretboard, and his fingers are flying over here, and you know those brain synapses must be firing off at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I look at this, and I think, how in the world can a human do this? How in the world can somebody take this box of wood and steel and make it produce all these beautiful sounds? It's beautiful. I love watching people when they are in their element doing the thing that they are really good at. It's a beautiful thing to watch, isn't it? Friday night, we were talking about some of the needs across the world, and we were talking about what it takes to make a big impact. And we talked about the idea that God loves to use ordinary people to do extraordinary things. In fact, not only does God love to do that, I think it's actually his preferred method, to be honest with you. And we talked about some statistics Friday night that were troubling. We said that right now, this morning, while we're gathered here together, roughly 1 in 2 people across the world are not walking with Jesus. People who have not given their lives to Christ, they have no relationship with him. Roughly 1 in 2 right now. And beyond that, right now, roughly 1 in 4 people living across the world, this is over 2 billion people. These are people who live in places across the world where there's nobody living near them who could tell them about Jesus if they wanted to hear it. These are people who not only have they not come into a relationship with Jesus, these are people who don't know there is a Jesus to believe in right now. And they don't have anybody living near them who could tell them. These are people that the Joshua Project calls frontier people, people who are totally unengaged. Those numbers are difficult. And if you think about those numbers, you may be thinking, how do we make an impact there? How do we actually do something? What does it take to actually make an impact and produce something beautiful in the midst of such great and vast need? That's what I want to talk about this morning. We have been together looking at Luke chapter 5. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn there or scroll there to Luke chapter 5. Friday night, we looked at the story of Peter and the time when Peter moved from being someone who was impressed with Jesus to somebody who was committed to Jesus. Somebody who was working as a fisherman, and now he has become a fisher of men. And we saw the story where Jesus called Peter, and he left his nets, and all of a sudden now he is a fisher of men. And then what we're going to see as we look at the rest of this chapter, picking it up in verse 12, and we're going to go down to verse 32, as we look at the rest of this chapter, we're going to see that Luke shows us what Jesus does as he begins to bring Peter through what I kind of call an apprenticeship or an internship almost, as he brings Peter and the other disciples who came with him through this training program. And what he's going to do now is he's going to teach them what it looks like to be a disciple maker. He's told Peter, okay, from now on, you're going to be a fisher of men. And then now, as Luke is recording this story and recounting this story to Theophilus, he's showing us, one thing he's showing us, in addition to what he teaches us about Jesus, is he's showing us the training program that Jesus brought the disciples through. And in this chapter, as we see the initial steps of this apprenticeship program with Jesus, we're going to see some of the essentials of disciple making. I was thinking about watching this video of the guitar yesterday, and I was thinking about my roommate. I had a roommate in college who decided he wanted to learn how to play classical guitar. And so someone gave him a classical guitar, and he took some lessons, and at first it didn't sound all that great. But then eventually he got pretty good. He actually got to the point where he could play some of this flamenco music. But how do you get there? As I was watching that video, I was thinking about myself. I can remember as a kid, I can distinctly remember sitting in my grandparents' living room in Merrimack, Massachusetts, and my grandfather pulled his guitar out of the closet, and he pulled my mom's old guitar that was still sitting there in the closet. He gave that to me. And I can remember as he took my fingers and he put them on the frets and showed me how to make a G chord. And then he showed me how to make a C chord, and then he showed me how to make a D chord. How many of you have ever dabbled in guitar before? Anybody? What's the first thing you learn? You learn G, C, and D, right? And if you know G, C, and D, and you know how to strum a little bit, the joke is you can play 95% of worship songs, right? Right? But nobody who gets good at guitar ever gets good without first learning the fundamentals, right? They learn the basics. Everybody starts at the same place, G, C, and D, and then they learn a little bit about how to strum. And what we're seeing here as Luke is going to work through the rest of this chapter is he's helping Peter and the other disciples understand what is some of the G, C, and D of disciple making. What are some of the basics of disciple making? And so we look at the rest of this chapter, we're going to see three things. we're going to see three things that are fundamental to the life of a disciple maker. Now, the first thing that we're going to see, as we pick this up here in verse 12 of Luke chapter 5, the first thing we're going to see is that a disciple maker is somebody who welcomes the unwelcomed. A disciple maker is somebody who welcomes the unwelcomed. Look here at verse 12. He says, while he was in one of the cities, Luke just picks the story up somewhere else. While he was in one of the stories, there came a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and he begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Now, this is a leper, and you're probably familiar with leprosy. You've probably heard some teaching about leprosy before. Leprosy was a skin disease. Probably wasn't leprosy as we've kind of typically looked at it, but it was some sort of skin disease, and there were very strict requirements on to protect people so that leprosy wouldn't be transmitted from one person to the other. It was a highly transmissible disease, and they had a bunch of laws put in place to help protect this. In fact, if you had a piece of fabric that came into contact with somebody who had leprosy, you had to take that off and you had to burn it. Or if you had some building materials that came into contact with somebody who had leprosy, you had to take those building materials and take them way outside of the camp and stick them out there so nobody would come near them. And if you had leprosy, you had to go and live outside of the community. You had to live and be excluded, living by yourself outside of the community so you wouldn't come into contact with anybody. And over the years, these laws that were given and designed to help protect people, they kind of became something else. And lepers began to have a stigma on them. And people looked down on them. And they were outcasts, literally, living on the outskirts of society. And Jesus sees this leper. He comes up to him, and the leper sees Jesus. And at this point, he'd heard about Jesus. Jesus is pretty famous at this point. He'd heard about him. He'd heard about some of the things that he's done. He falls down on his face before Jesus, and he begs him. He says, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Notice one thing that's interesting here. He doesn't have any doubt about if Jesus can heal him. He already knows he can. The question is, will he? Will he be willing to heal a man such as me, who's living on the outskirts of society and everybody thinks is a loser? And how does Jesus respond? Verse 13. And Jesus stretched out his hand, and he touched him. And he said, I will be clean. And as Peter is watching this, I wonder what went through his mind. He knew what lepers were. He knew about the stigma. He had been trained since he was a child that when you see a person like this, what do? You walk on the other side of the street. You stay away. You get away from this guy. And not only that, but Peter probably had in his mind something that had happened not too long before. You remember in chapter 4 of Luke, Peter had just been, Jesus had just been at Peter's house in Capernaum. His mother-in-law had a high fever, and what did he do? He healed her. How did he heal her? Well, the text says he stood over her and healed her with his words. He didn't touch her. He healed her, spoke it, and the fever left. But here he is. He comes to this leper, this guy who is untouchable, this guy, by the way, who probably hasn't felt human touch for weeks or months or maybe even years. And here is this famous dude who's doing some stuff that's pretty cool, and he touches him. And it says, and immediately the leprosy left him. In verse 14, and he charged him to tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest. As you know, I serve at a seminary in Haiti, and I'm a professor. And one of my favorite assignments to assign my students is something that I call a compassionate servant project. That's what I call it in English. Call it something different in French. But basically what the project is I tell my students, this is a leadership course, and it's a servant leadership course, and I want them to grasp the aspect of servanthood in leadership. And so what I tell them to do is I want you to go out into the community, find some segment of the population, maybe in your neighborhood or maybe in your region or whatever, find some segment of the population that is forgotten. some segment of the population that's typically ignored or pushed to the side or that people don't really pay attention to, and I want you to go serve with them. And I want you to, and I give them, I say, I want you to log actually a certain amount of hours throughout the semester with this group of people. And I deliberately just leave it like that. I don't give them a whole lot of structure. I don't tell them, I want you to plan a lesson plan, or I just want you to do something. Maybe it's a hospital, and in Haiti, we don't typically have a lot of people visiting people in hospitals, so maybe go to a hospital and visit people who are sick and work with the hospital doing that. Or maybe go serve in an orphanage, or maybe go to a prison and visit some prisoners that haven't been visited since they've been locked up. But go do something like that. And every semester, the reaction is the same. When the first day of class, I hand out the syllabus and I'm explaining this project, and the students look at it and they think, Professor, don't you know I'm so busy with all the homework? How am I going to have to, you're asking me to do something outside of class. I'm never going to have enough time to do this. I have to work on my family. They always whine. To which I say, well, you know, guys, Jesus has grace, but I don't have any. I'm sorry. And I consider this assignment so important that I actually make it worth 25% of the final grade. So if you don't do it, you're going to have a hard time, because I grade the other papers pretty hard, by the way. So if you don't do it, you're probably going to fail. And they go out and do it, and every semester, almost every single paper that comes in, you know what I see? And what I do is I ask them to write a response, a reaction paper. I ask them to reflect on the experience, and I ask them to process some questions. What did you learn about God as you served with this person? What did you learn about yourself? What were you surprised in yourself, in your own reaction to this person? I ask questions like this. And every semester when I read through these papers, the students always tell me, Professor, I was against this when you first assigned it, but this was the best thing I ever did all semester. And this past semester, I took a student. In fact, if you can put a picture of Dufay up there. There he is. Isn't he a good-looking guy? This is one of my students from this past semester, and I assigned the thing, and we lost our main campus, hopefully not lost permanently, but right now we don't have access to our main campus, and so we're functioning out of an extension campus right now. And one of the things that we used to do at our old campus is we would go out and we had a lot of ministry into the community. I mentioned Friday night, we've built a bunch of houses over the years. We've had a lot of people come to Christ over there. And so what we've done is we've moved over to the new campuses is we've put the same philosophy of ministry right into action. And we've got our students going out into the community and building relationships. And so I told my students, I said, hey, if you don't have a connection of someplace you can go, you're welcome to join with what we're doing here in the neighborhood, participate in that, and I'll give you credit for that. And so a lot of my students do that because it's easy and it's right by the campus. And so this is one of our students, and he went out and he did it, and you can go to the next picture. There we go. So he went out into the neighborhood, and it was interesting because you can see there in that picture, he's dressed like he would normally dress for class. So Haiti is a very traditional society, and so a lot of our students look almost as good as Pastor John does right now, and so they're always wearing their shirt and their tie and their shoes, and so they went out into the community dressed like they would dress for class because they had just come out of class, and the people in the community were kind of looking at them and kind of giving them the cold shoulder. You're like, what are you doing? Go to the next picture for me. And so they were able to connect with some kids. Let's go to the next one. And then the students, and this one in particular, started to pick up on the fact that they were catching the cold shoulder. And he was sitting there thinking, what can I do to break the ice here? I mean, yes, it's true that a person dressed like me normally wouldn't be hanging out in a neighborhood like this. Yes, it's true that a person dressed like me wouldn't normally be engaging people like this. But I want to break through somehow. So what he did was he went and he sat down next to this woman who's washing clothes. She's doing laundry there. He rolled up his sleeves, and he got in there, and he started scrubbing the clothes next to her. Let's go to the next picture. And he said, Professor, it was amazing because these women would not give us the time of day when we walked in, but as soon as I sat down and started scrubbing clothes, all of a sudden it got quiet. And I heard one of the ladies give a little bit of giggle, and then the other lady across from me, she looked at me and she said, well, I guess you guys aren't stuck up. And he said, Professor, all of a sudden it clicked for me. He said, I had no idea how I was perceived. But when I got down onto their level and showed them that I was willing to sit down and be with them, you saw the other picture. He went out and started working with a farmer, started hoeing his garden for him. When I got down into their level and showed them that I see them, all of a sudden, the ice was broken, and I had access now. And he got home, and he started texting me all these pictures. He was so excited about it, and he got an A, by the way, for this semester. He did a good job. But this is the thing. A disciple maker, we can turn the picture off now. A disciple maker is someone who welcomes the unwelcomed. And that's what Jesus wanted Peter and the others to see here as he gets out here and engages first with the leper. And I think it's interesting that the first place he goes is to engage with the leper, because you know what? As he goes out and engages the unwelcomed as the first thing, that the truth is, that's not the first thing we do all the time, is it? Now, I want you to think, who is it right now who is unwelcomed in our area, in Derry, in Londonderry, Manchester, Hampstead, Sandown? Who is it that's unwelcomed? You know, Pastor John is not the team that plays against Alabama. And are we welcoming them? I don't know who it is. Right now, as I came back to the States, it's always a shock for me whenever I come back to the States because I see how much things are changed here. And right now, as we go around, political signs everywhere. Every time I go onto YouTube, there's a political ad that I see. Could it be that the unwelcomed right now maybe is a Democrat, maybe is a Republican? And these are the people that we're not willing to engage. A disciple maker understands that our job is to welcome the unwelcomed. In verse 14, picking the story up again here, immediately the leprosy left him, and then in verse 14, Jesus charged him to tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing as Moses commanded for a proof to them. This is an interesting little note that Luke adds here, because what was happening here, what's going on here, as Jesus healed this guy, and as this guy goes and presents himself to the priest, you know what's going to happen? He's going to send a message to the priest that something new is afoot. Can you imagine what the group text was like after this? You know, as Ephraim texts Ezekiel and says, did you see Dave? What do you mean about it? The guy with the skin? Yeah, he's healed. What? Yeah, he's healed. I mean, his skin looks great now. He's looking fantastic now. Well, what happened? Well, that Jesus guy healed him. What? Well, how did he heal? Well, he touched him. Are you kidding me? And all of a sudden, the message would begin to spread. Something new is happening in Galilee. And that something new is about to be exposed, because the story continues. Luke shifts now, and the scene closes, and then the scene opens up in verse 17 to a new story. And you're familiar with this story. You've probably heard it in Sunday school before. Jesus is in a house. He's teaching, and a bunch of Pharisees are there listening. They've traveled from all around. A bunch of them have come, and they're listening to him teaching. And then we've got some guys who have their friend that's paralyzed. And so they hear that Jesus is in the area, so they put their friend on a mat, and they're like, we got to get this guy over to Jesus, because Jesus is the one who can do something about this. We've heard about what he's done in other places. Jesus is the guy that can help him. We've got to get him there. So they get him up to the house, and then they realize the place is packed. There's no way they're going to be able to get him in. And so, God love them, what they do, they crawl up on the roof. And you've heard the story, right? They peel away part of the roof, and they lower the mat down through the roof so that it just happens to set down right in front of Jesus. And everybody knows who Jesus is and what he's going to do at this point. Everybody assumes that he's going to heal this guy. And the mat gets lowered down, and it comes to rest on the floor there in front of Jesus. And then in verse 20, we see, okay, now the mat is right there. Jesus has to address this. And the quick thing to do would be just to heal this guy, and that way he could get back to the message. And the mat lowers, comes to rest on the ground. In verse 20, when he saw their faith, he said, man, your sins are forgiven you. What? This is the opposite of what we would expect Jesus to do in this moment. Not only is this the opposite that we would expect him to do, but Luke has already set us up for us to have a conflict in our mind here, because in verse, where is it? At the end of verse 17, Luke adds this little note. He says, and the power of the Lord was with him to heal. So he's sitting there in this room, he's teaching these guys, and Luke adds, the power of the Lord was with him to heal. What does that mean? Well, of course he could heal, but Luke wants you to remember as you get ready to go into this story, don't forget, this is the healer guy. And then the mat comes down to rest, and all of a sudden he says, your sins are forgiven you. This is not what we expect. In verse 21, the scribes and Pharisees respond, and they begin to question, saying, key question here, who is this who speaks blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone? Exactly. That's what he wants them to ask. And he begins to have an interchange with them, and he says, guys, I don't understand what the conflict is here. What's easier for me to do, to forgive this guy's sins or to heal? I mean, if I just say his sins are forgiven, what are you going to do to confirm that? Obviously, that'd be the easier thing. But then he says in verse 24, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the man who was paralyzed, I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home. And as soon as that sentence finished coming out of his lips, the room felt silent, and time slowed down to a crawl. And all eyes went to this guy on the mat. Because here's the thing. If this man stands up, then the whole theological system that the Pharisees had been operating under goes out the window. Because if this man stands up, not only is that a beautiful miracle, but it also confirms the miracle that he had just done in the forgiving of sins. And all eyes go to this mat, and they probably go first to his legs. What is going to happen here? And in verse 25, and immediately he rose up before them, picked up what he'd been laying on, and went home, glorifying God. And amazement seized them all. The Pharisees had this system. The Pharisees had a system of essentially behavior modification and perfecting an external appearance. This is what the Pharisees were about. Jesus criticizes this in another section of the Gospels where he calls this, you remember, whitewashed tombs. In other words, the outside of the tomb is looking great, but what's inside is really a mess. But the Pharisees had this system. Their focus was on behavior management and managing an external appearance. But Jesus knew that the problem is not what you see on the outside. The problem is what's going on the inside. And so that's why when this man comes in, the first thing he does is he forgives his sin. Does that mean that the man is paralyzed because he's a sinner? No, that's not what he's saying at all. Jesus addresses that directly in another passage to say, no, this is not how that works. But the man had a problem that was deeper than the presenting problem that they saw. It was his sin. Let's go to that next picture of the gate in my family. This is a picture of my family. We have some beautiful kids. That's not why I'm putting this picture here, though. I want you to see the gate behind it. I'm sorry. I was looking for a picture of my gate, and this is one of the only ones I could find. So there's my family, too. Aren't they cute? Don't look at my belly. Okay. I have a problem, by the way. I've been here at the Calvary Missions Conference for this weekend. Every time I go home to Haiti, they look at me and they say, Luke, what happened? And I say, well, it was that cheeseburger soup that the pastor made. But this is my gate here, and our house in Haiti, like all houses in Port-au-Prince, is surrounded by concrete walls, and then we have a razor wire sitting on top of the walls, and so from the outside of the street, really looks like a prison. And then we have these metal gates. We have a metal walk-in gate that you see behind us here, and then we also have a metal drive-in gate. So the whole property is enclosed, and we have multiple layers of security to try to keep ourselves safe there in Port-au-Prince. Well, the gates are made out of metal, and I remember realizing a while ago that the gate was looking pretty rough. In fact, you can go to the next slide there. This is a picture actually that was taken last week. I don't even know if you've seen this yet. Yeah, this is the young man who's watching our house for us, and he was handing out some candy to trick-or-treaters on Halloween. But I realized that the gate was looking pretty rough, and I had like an hour one afternoon, and I had a gallon of paint, and I said, all right, I'm just going to go and slap some paint on this real quick and try to get this cleaned up. And so I grabbed the paint, and I grabbed the brush, and I had a scraper because some of the paint had to be peeled off. And I get out there, and I get ready to go to work, and I'm scraping, and then I realize kind of in the crevices and in the corners, there's some rust there. There's some rust that had begun to form, and I thought, oh, shoot, I don't even think I have any sandpaper here at the house right now. I don't have a wire brush. How am I gonna clean this up? And I only have an hour right now, and Becca's scheduled a photographer to come and take pictures of the family. I need this gate to look decent. So I said, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna paint over it. I'm just gonna slap some paint on here, and then I'll come back later with the wire brush or with some sandpaper and clean up those rust spots and treat that. And then I'll just repaint over those little corners. Well, that was 3 years ago. The gate hasn't been touched since. So don't worry. But what do you think has happened to those rust spots over the past 3 years? The gate was looking great right after I put the paint on it, but now over those 3 years, as I look at it, not only is the rust popped out again, but it's getting worse. There are little bubbles in different places, and I haven't told you this, but I actually need to weld one of the hinges back on. Don't worry, it's fine. See, if you don't treat rust and you just try to paint over it, what's going to happen? Anybody familiar with rust here? This is New England. It's going to come out. And Jesus knew that. And so as this man came in, he said, yeah, yes, I need to deal with the issue that you see, but I also need to deal with the issue that you don't see. We're in a period right now, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of change in our society. There's a lot of change for those of us who work in ministry. It feels like every month there's a new ministry paradigm that we are supposed to adopt, or a new book that we're supposed to read, or a new Bible study that's going to fundamentally change everything in the way I look at my relationships or whatever. There's all these new things coming. But you know what's never going to change? The fact that Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. The gospel is a beautiful thing. The gospel is the most powerful thing that has ever existed in this world. The gospel fundamentally transforms everything about us. It transforms our horizontal relationships with each other. It transforms our relationship with ourselves. It transforms how we look at creation. But none of that can happen until there's a transformation in our vertical relationship with God. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. And no matter what strategy shifts we see, no matter what different mission paradigms come, at the end of the day, it always comes back to this, that Jesus has come into the world to save sinners. So a disciple maker that's effective welcomes the unwelcomed. A disciple maker that's effective is someone who looks beyond the surface and is willing to do the work of helping their disciple get beneath the surface. But it goes beyond that. I want to end with one more little snippet here. The scene closes here on this scene with the paralytic, and now the scene opens again to a new scene here in verse 27. Verse 27, after this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. Now, just as you've heard about leprosy, just as you know about the paralytic, you've probably heard about tax collectors before too, right? Tax collectors were losers with a capital L. Tax collectors were horrible human beings. These are guys who, they were Israelites, they were Jews, but here they are, they had thrown their lot in with the occupying country. They're collecting taxes from their own countrymen, from their own brothers and sisters, and they're carrying those taxes over to the occupying country and handing their money over to them. And by the way, along the way, they're skimming a little bit off the top so that they can get rich. And they were ruthless about that. They would position themselves. If you had a bridge crossing a river or a stream or something, they would position themselves right next to the bridge so that they know whoever crosses this, they're going to have to come into contact with the tax collector eventually. They're going to get their money one way or another, and they're going to deliver it over to the occupiers, and they're going to put some in their pocket along the way. These were horrible guys, and Jesus runs into one of these guys one day, a guy named Levi, sitting at his tax booth. And he said to him at the end of verse 27 there, he says, "Follow me." And leaving everything, the tax collector, he rose and he followed him. And verse 29, and Levi made a great feast in his house, and there was a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at the table with them. Can you imagine what Levi was thinking? He knows who he is. He knows how everybody views him. He's also heard about Jesus and heard about this guy who's been healing people. But now, all of a sudden, here they are. He's in his house. He's got a bunch of his fellow tax collecting friends here in the house. And here's Jesus sitting at the table with him. There's food on the table, and Jesus is sitting there, and everybody's laughing and having conversation. And he's looking at Jesus, and he's like, this guy's actually pretty chill. This is weird. And the Pharisees had a different response, though. Verse 30, and the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" See, in the first century, in this culture, if you're going to go into somebody's house and accept hospitality from them, if you're going to sit at the table and break bread with them, there's an understanding here that there's like a mutual acceptance that is occurring here. And the Pharisees see that, and they're thinking, "I thought you were a religious leader. What are you doing?" And Jesus answered them, verse 31. He says, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." See, Jesus is saying, hey, you see these guys and you see what they do. And similar to the paralytic, you see what's happening on the outside, but what you don't realize is what this guy needs is me. In order to solve the issue that's going on inside him that is manifesting in this evil, despicable behavior, he needs me. And so Jesus goes to his house, because he knows that what this guy needs is to spend time with Jesus. Because here's the thing, anybody who spends time with Jesus, they're going to come away radically transformed. What he needs is Jesus. Back before we lost the campus, I used to have to drive every day to the campus, and it's about a 15-mile drive. And because of Port-au-Prince traffic, it would take about an hour and a half every day. I swear I lost years of my life in that drive. It was so. But one of the things that I began to do is I thought, I'm driving this Nissan Patrol. It has 7 seat belts in it. And so I started a practice of making sure that I never drove alone. And I would always have either a staffer with us or another professor with me, or a bunch of students in the back. We would fill the car up, and every day on the way across town and then on the way back across town, I'd always have students with me. And it was a great way to practice my language and practice my Creole, and a great way to get to know them. And there was one day we were on the way back, and it's kind of every day on the way back, I was kind of like a bus driver. You know, I would have multiple stops along the way and drop everybody off. And we got almost to the other side of the city, and we're there in Delma, which is a main road there in Port-au-Prince. And it's after dark at this point, and the traffic is backed up, and we're just kind of coaxing along. And I remember at that time I had some issues with my clutch, and I was trying to make sure my clutch didn't burn out in this traffic. And it's just me and one other student. There's only one student left. He's sitting in the passenger seat next to me. And this particular student, there was something about him. I noticed it in class. There's something, it was almost like he was a little conceited, almost like he was a little stuck. There was like a hard shell there, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And no matter what I did in class, I would try to call on him or try to build him up, or I couldn't penetrate it in class. But there we are, we're driving, and we're almost on the other side of town, and his stop is coming up not too far away, and he looks at me, he said, "Professor, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, what's up?" He said, "My wife and I, we've been married for over 10 years now, and we just want to have kids. And we've been praying, and it's not happening. And to be honest with you, I'm feeling less like a man, and I'm not really sure what this means with God. And am I misunderstanding God here? What's going on?" And all of a sudden, everything slowed down, and it was like I was immersed in this beautiful discipleship moment where I was able to walk with him. I didn't have any solutions, and I didn't need any solutions at that point. I needed to be Jesus to him in that moment, and we spent some time working through that together. And from that moment on, all of a sudden, it's like I could see the shell falling off. And all of a sudden, we became tight. And that wasn't the first time he asked me questions and the first time we had meaningful conversation. And I realized from that experience that as a professor, I can have the best dialed in lecture in the world with the most beautiful PowerPoint in the world, but that is never going to reach the level of impact that I can have in what has become my favorite classroom, the car on the commute across town. See, a disciple maker is someone who welcomes the unwelcomed. A disciple maker is someone who looks beyond the surface, but a disciple maker is also someone who understands that there is power in proximity. That's what Jesus understood as he saw Levi. He knew he needed to go to his house. He knew they needed to spend time at the table together. And that's what I've seen in Haiti. And by the way, we've been building a program at the seminary that another one of our professors has been working on to get all of our professors to spend time with our students outside of class. We try to fund their transportation sometimes. If they take a student to a restaurant, we try to cover the bill because we've realized that there's power in proximity. And that the impact that we can have outside of the classroom oftentimes far exceeds the impact that we can have inside. There's power in proximity. Howard Hendricks, who was a former professor of mine at Dallas Seminary, you may have heard that name before, wonderful man, he's with the Lord now, but he had a quote. He said this one time, and this really hit home for me. He said, "You can impress people at a distance, but you impact them only up close." I started sharing with some of the statistics this morning. Right now, 2 billion people across the world live in places where no one lives near them who could tell them about Jesus if they wanted to hear it. How are we going to go? How are we going to reach them? How are we going to change that? Proximity. We got to go to them. We've got to go to them. We've got to get into their world. We've got to learn their language. We've got to learn their culture. We've got to go to them. We've got to share life with them. We've got to suffer with them. These past 5 years in Haiti have been some of the hardest in our life, but I can't tell you how many Haitians have come to us and say, the fact that you're still here says something. It's opened doors for us. That's why we stayed. But if we're going to reach the 2 billion, we've got to be willing to go to them. And the other thing that we need to think about, I mentioned this the other night. I just read a book the other day on missions, and the author pointed out that right now, 2/3 of the world is closed to missionary visas and religious worker visas. Borders are closing up. The world is closing up. And so I think we can all agree that we need to go to them if we're going to reach the 2 billion. But how are we going to get there? Well, the days are slowly closing where guys like me with a seminary degree and a Bible college degree and an ordination certificate can go. If we're going to reach the 2 billion, it's going to be engineers and entrepreneurs and doctors and people who work in the domain of tourism, people who go and open hotels, people who go to places like China and open up a manufacturing factory and hire people and pull people into their orbit. And all of a sudden now they've got an audience of disciples that they can begin to impact as a disciple maker. If we're going to reach the 2 billion that are unreached, we're going to have to go, but it's not going to be as much guys like me that go anymore. It's going to be ordinary people who are willing to say, you know what? God's wired me with an engineering mind. God's wired me with a jack of all trades kind of mind. God's wired me as a teacher. Maybe I can go teach English somewhere. It's going to be ordinary people who are willing to finally see themselves in the Great Commission and be willing to go. One of the things that's interesting right now is the trend in work. How many of you have a job that's partially virtual right now? Anybody working from home? A bunch of people working from home. We're seeing a lot of people who are working full-time at home right now. You know what? The internet in Asia is just as fast as it is here. Could you take your job overseas to someplace among the unreached and begin to make disciples there? I have friends of mine who've done it. It could happen. Or could you, with your engineering mind, go to some part of the world and build something that is needed to be built? If we're going to make a dent in the 2 billion, we've got to go to them because there's power in proximity. And it's going to have to be ordinary people that do it. So I just want to leave one question in your mind, and then I'm going to pray. Would you be willing to consider going? If Jesus is who he says he is, if he really is the master of all creation, that means that he has the authority to move us around the world wherever he wants to place us. Would you be willing to put yourself in his hands and let him turn you into a fisher of men? Father, as someone who's been living on the field the past 6 years, I wake up every day conscious of the rich privilege it is that you have afforded me and my family by letting us participate in what it is that you were already doing in Haiti. Father, you know, Becca and I have told you many times that we are so grateful. Even amidst all the conflict, we are so grateful for the chance we've had to raise our kids in Port-au-Prince these past few years, as crazy as it's been, because we've seen your faithfulness in new ways. And so, Father, I pray for my brothers and sisters who are here today, that you would begin to give them a vision for how you can use them in this mission that you have entrusted to us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.